guys, so this is Amber again, and I'm going to be doing a second tutorial on request of Aariel&Amber, who asked me to kind of just go over how we edited my 6 degrees part with Dimitri and Cindy. So this is going to be pretty in-depth than my last one. I'm going to be covering a lot more than just a couple effects here and there. So hopefully you guys can bear with me. And I just hope that and pray that this program actually works out. Okay, so since this is a crossover, I'm going to focus on masking first. And as you can kind of tell, this is not an actual scene from Cinderella. Cinderella is actually being masked into a scene from Anastasia. But I only have one clip here on this, and this is because what I like to do with all of my masks is I like to render them separately, kind of like I do the entire project before adding a coloring, and it's kind of for the same reason. Sometimes when you add colorings onto specific layers, like say Cindy was actually a separate layer here, and I added a coloring onto it, there could be weird halos around her outline of the figure, some strange shadows in the background. You know, you never know what's going to happen sometimes when you add a coloring onto individual clips that way. So it's just nice just to kind of render it all together in a nice clip so that everything can just be uniform and you don't have to worry about fades, you know, making one part like Cinderella just kind of fade away faster than the background and look just kind of odd where you can see the background behind her. So it just kind of gets rid of a lot of variables by just rendering them separately. And as far as the actual masks go, I have quite a few examples of masks that I used in this project, and some of them are very general masking tips, some of them are just kind of little tricks that I learned here and there that might help you out. But we're going to start with this one here. This is just a very basic mask. This is Dimitri. You can see that the original footage actually looks like this if we get rid of the masks. So it's just basically him at the ball, just kind of gasping. And we have a separate, different background here from the same movie, but obviously different than what we have originally here. Now, with my masks, one of the things that I really like to do is with these little diamonds on the bottom here, these are called keyframes. And for those that are basically new to masking, these keyframes, they kind of tell Sony Vegas where you want these little anchor points. These are called anchor points, at least that's what I call them. But these are the anchor points that are going to tell what you want included in your mask. And depending on if you change them with each different keyframe, which is exactly what we're going to want to do with a moving image, because obviously he's not staying in the exact same place every single frame, then these keyframes are going to kind of tell Vegas that we're going to move some of these anchor points around depending on where we want them. And I usually like to have my entire timeline covered with as many keyframes as possible. I try and get all the frames with some type of keyframe, and this is just me trying to make it easier for myself. If I wanted to shorten this entire clip, instead only have about half of it, so maybe I want to stop it right here, I can just right click, split, and I still have all of this masked without getting rid of it. Another thing that I like to do as far as masking, so these are anchor points. And you can see I have a lot of them, and normally with masking I tend to overcomplicate things a lot. You don't necessarily need to have these many anchor points. Normally when you're masking, you would use this anchor tool right here, and it looks like a little pen normally, so if I wanted to create a mask like right here on his cheek, that's basically how it would be done, but obviously I don't want that. But one of the things that can happen sometimes when you click on a anchor point, let me get one actually up here. So say I want, if I click on this one, you can see that it's different. It's like this little triangle. If I click on it, it creates these little sliding characters here. And basically what those are going to do, they're going to help you create nice, gentle curves. Now, for a lot of this project, you know, he has some gentle curves to his cheek, to his ears, to his hair, and I could just use maybe like 1 or 2 anchor points on these parts rather than having, you know, gazillions that I obviously used in here. But the reason why I don't like using that, and I like using multiple just regular anchor points, is because I like to move my anchor points around depending on what keyframe I'm in. So for this keyframe, you know, this point is here, you know, and I could just have it have the sliders, but if in the next key point, maybe I moved it to where I want it here, where there's a nice little angle, and there's definitely not a curve there, it's a lot more complicated to try and fix it where there isn't a little sliding option on my anchor point. It's just easier just to kind of just have them kind of all uniform for me. That's just my preference. You can do it whatever way you want. If you want to simplify things, this is just kind of what I do. Another preference that I have is with most cartoons, you can see that there is a line, and it just kind of tells us as audience members that this is a cartoon. You'll see blacks on just about everything, but I like to keep those in my mask as much as possible. I won't have it completely, you know, completely out there, because you'll start to get a little bit of this coloring in the background into these lines. But I like to have a little bit of them just so that when I'm making an entire man up like this, it kind of still looks like it's a cartoon, like it's still part of the same thing, because you still have these black lines, and it just kind of makes it look like the creators, you know, if they really wanted to, like this is an actual scene that they would do rather than the one that we have right here. Alright, so that's just kind of my own personal preference. Another thing I like to do with my masking, as you can see here, it's very fixated. There's no zooms happening. Of course, this is an actual scene where it's not moving in the actual movie, so I don't really have to, you know, edit it or anything, but I like to keep everything fixated. And part of this is because when I take it into an actual project and I want to do things, like I tend to use a lot of zooms, basically on every single one of my clips. And so if I wanted to zoom in on this particular man, and once it's rendered, if I wanted to zoom in one project but it's already zooming out, it makes it a lot more difficult for me to zoom in. But if it's fixated, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, really. So just kind of something that I like to do just to make it simpler for me. This particular mask here is one of those cases where Cindy is not standing fixated. And this is one of those rare cases where I actually will leave it the way it is. And what I had to do is, with this background, instead of staying fixated like it normally would because it is an image, I had to zoom in a little bit and then gradually zoom it out at about what I would suspect would be the same pace as the original Cinderella scene. So as she's moving out, you can see the background kind of moving too. So it kind of tends to work a little bit more cohesive altogether. You don't want the background to move out faster than Cindy is. Since it is behind her, it's going to move slightly slower. But this is just like one of those things that I like to do artistic wise. This particular man up here, this is an example of using the foreground actually as an image and using the background as, you know, a moving clip. So it's kind of like the reverse effect. Instead of having the background be an image, now the foreground is an image. And I did this mainly because in the original Cinderella, this scene, she's standing here looking out at the palace, but the camera, I guess you could call say the camera in the movie is actually moving this direction. So she's in constant movement. And in order to try and zero it out and make her stay constant, that would take a lot of pan cropping on my part. So instead, I basically just went up to here. This is how I take image little snapshots of what I'm seeing here. I clicked this, dragged it down, and basically just kind of masked it. So now we have this nice little mask of her. And then I take the scene that I want from Anastasia with Paris and just kind of put it behind her. So now it looks like she's looking at a Paris rather than the castle. Okay, and then this is actually a man-up that I did not use in the MEP part. I was about to, except I realized that if I wanted to, I would have to mask an entire figure of Dimitri and the random girl, and that was a lot of work, and since I was already late with my part, I decided just to kind of just leave it out. But this is a really good example of using images with moving pictures, not as a background, but kind of as a way to create a fixated background that's originally just on a clip. So hopefully this will make a little bit of sense as I kind of explain it. But here we have our actual footage. And it's of Cindy just kind of, you know, emerging out of this statue while her stepmother and stepsisters are coming outside of the door. Now, with this particular man-up, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have Dimitri kind of coming out of the doorway, not her stepmother. So in order to do this, I had to find some way to get rid of her and their shadows that were appearing on the floor. So what I did was I masked this area starting with the edge of the doorway, and I just masked this little area. And you're going to want to pay attention to this. This is what it looks like on mine. It'll probably be a little bit different on yours depending on what program you're using. But you have a positive mask and a negative mask. So this one we want negative because we don't want the space that's selected. If we had it on positive, that's saying that yes, we just want this space, we don't want Cindy. That's not true. We want Cindy to be in the shot and we don't want her stepmother or her stepsisters. So we're going to say no, we want that as a negative mask. So then we have that part. But then I wanted to make sure that earlier on in this clip there is a scene where there is actually nothing in the doorway, but Cindy is all the way over here, as you can see from the image here. Woo! Right here. There we go. She's all the way over here, and we want her already kind of hidden. So instead, I take this image and I basically just mask the exact same area. With this particular scene, it wouldn't really matter if we just mask this area, as Cinderella's already covering up this section. But this will just kind of just make it a little bit easier, and we wanted to move things around. But this one, since we do want this area here because there's nobody in it, we're going to make it a positive mask, and we're going to make sure that that's underneath. So this area on this clip is being taken out. This one can come forward. So instead of having her stepmothers come through the door, we now have a scene where Cinderella's just creepily, you know, checking up over the statue to see if anybody's there. But of course, if we were going to actually make this a real man-up with Dimitri, we would mask him in the place of the stepmother. Alright, and as far as this one goes, this is a way to do kind of basically the same thing, but instead of using an image, we're going to just use what we have originally with Sony Vegas, particularly color gradients actually. So with this one, if we look at the original file, let me get rid of Dimitri here and turn that off. So this is the original scene that we see. This is this lovely lady is getting up in Cinderella's face, but we obviously don't want her in the scene, we want Dimitri instead. So what we want, but because she's kind of just all over the place, just taking up this much space, as we can see from here, it's going to be really hard if we wanted to get an image and just cover it up, because we still want, you know, this area, but how do we get that with her in the way? So this is kind of how I did it. So because this is a nice gradiated wall, we can see that it's basically just the same color, just slightly going to black, because we're not actually getting into the part with the details. In fact, if we wanted, we could just get rid of those in general. But because it's this nice gradient, you can just take this, go to Media Generators, Color Gradient, and I use the preset linear white to black. I drag it down, so you have this nice little thing to work with. So you would just kind of drag your second point to where just about here, where it's just kind of starting, or depending on where you want your gradient to start, you know, that's where you would move it. And you would use this color, pick color from screen option here, and just basically kind of click on the screen the color that you want it to match with. And usually I like clicking it from the actual footage down here, so make sure that's the exact same color. And then your second one is basically going to be the same thing. You're just going to kind of select the color that you want and make sure that's all lining up the way you want it. And then we're going to cookie cutter her out. So instead of having to mask, I mean, if you could mask if you want, but this way, just because it's gradiated, I wanted a nice softer edge, and that's what cookie cutter helps us get. So it doesn't really matter exactly when you start, depending on your clips. Sometimes the characters will move, like she's moving, but it's kind of just stuck in the same way. She's not really going over. So I'll just kind of stick it here. But this is basically just a regular old square, and we're starting it right about here because we want this section of Cindy, but we don't want her. So we're going to have this part be selected, and we're going to feather it just a little bit so it's kind of a softer edge, so it's not as noticeable the fact that we actually did this gradient, because as you can see there are a couple shadows that will appear on the original footage. But this way it kind of hints that, like, oh yeah, well, it might not be exactly, but you know, it's close enough, and that's exactly what we want. So then when you drag your actual mask into the project, suddenly it's Dimitri getting up in Cindy's face rather than the lady. And of course with this one, I can also show you ways that I use to make a man-up look a little bit more realistic, or at least in the sense that they're from the same movie. So in this case, I actually use color corrector and color balance. And this is what I would use if the original clip right here, so Dimitri, you could probably make this work, but you can see that his skin's a lot darker than Cindy's. It's got a little bit of more green than maybe what we would want. So this is where hues that are a little bit different are differing between the two different movies. This is where you would want to fix that. And color corrector and color balance are really great at helping that. So with color corrector, what I did, if you take off color balance, so I kind of made it so that he's a little bit more red than he was originally, because he was a little bit more green than we wanted. So you kind of move it so that's a little bit more red, so it's matching kind of the pinkish tone of her skin. But as you can see, this is a little bit more than maybe what we would want. And you can, of course, mess. It's great to mess with saturation, gamma, things like that. But then you would come into color balance once that's done. Turn that on. And you would kind of move it. So this is a little bit more red than I wanted. So if we move it back just a little bit, so as an example, this is now a -17. So we moved it a little bit farther back so that the blue and the green can push forward a little bit more. We have a scene that looks a little bit more like what it would originally look like if they were in the same movie. Of course, it's not perfect, and obviously, you know, there are hints that they're not from the same movie, but it's close enough, and at least makes it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, now with this one, this is kind of a example of how to use masking but yet have it be very soft edges. So this is something I don't know exactly if it's available to all programs. I don't remember really seeing this in previous Sony Vegas programs, but of course, you know, I'm still learning, so it's very possible that I probably just missed it. But in this particular case, Cinderella, of course, is like putting the two halves of the heart together, and it's in constant movement. It's a frame that's in constant movement, and instead of masking this to have two different, you know, halves that are suddenly coming together, I decided just to show it as one piece. So what I did was I basically just masked this footage of Cinderella just twirling in her gown, and it's not actually exact to the that's not what I want, to the heart below. If we look at where I feathered it, this is where the feathering comes in. If you look at feather, if there is no feather, this is the mask that it is, and of course it's very rough. It's not even lined up completely right. So this is kind of one of those instances where you can kind of cheat a little bit. Alright, so what I did is that I wanted to make this look like more of a memory, like just kind of an image appearing on the glass, but it's still a little bit see-through. So this is one of the ways that you can do it. So since I masked the heart, so it's in the basic shape that I want, even though it's not perfect, it's what we want to do. So you go over to here, and it's under this path little section, I guess. And you would go down to feather. And because I want the feather to go inward, if we went outward, you would get this area right here that is not selected, and that's not what we want. So we want it to go in. You can also have it go out. You can have it go both. You can have it go none. You don't want any feathering, which is normally what we would do in most masking instances. But because we actually do want this feather, we're going to say in. And then here you would just slide it depending on how much feather you want. You could have it go so much in that it's basically like barely even there. You could have it be close to none. So it's just this very, you know, softer edge. So it looks like this. This is where it's really helpful if you have a mask, say, of a character who's just kind of all over the place, has very everywhere hair, and you just kind of just want to soften the edge, so it's just, you know, so it's not exact, you know, your mask is not perfect, but you know, you just kind of want it to seem like it is. This is the perfect tool to do that. Okay, so there we have this one, and basically Dimitri's kind of, it's just basically the same exact way, just with the feathering. Alright, and as far as this one goes, this is the more complex way to create a background and cover up characters that you don't want. So as opposed to the color gradient, that's very easy and nice and simplistic, you have instances like this, where if we get rid of these two tracks, we have this image where Dimitri is kind of running away and Anya's behind him. You see that she's not really moving at all. I mean, she is, like, her hands and her arms and stuff are moving, but her dress is so fixated that it's going to be really, like, you know, it's going to be really hard to get rid of her. So this is where Photoshop comes in hand. So what I did was I took several different shots of this exact scene and put them into Photoshop. So for example, I would maybe take a shot here and get this section right here, because there's her arm's not there yet, because as we see, she kind of moves her arms up and we're like, oh, well, I don't exactly want that there. And her arm goes back as well, so we want this section here. So I'll take one of that. Maybe I'll take this section because it's a little bit larger, you know, just so you try and have as many scenes with some open space as possible. And then I'll show you what I did. So this is the file that I used. This is basically me covering up Anya. So when I first open it, you're going to have just, you know, some pieces. And these, if they're not turned on, you're just going to have what we have here with Anya. And I'd have several different ones. I always keep references, which is what these two are, so I know I can look at it and say, okay, well, maybe her arm is still out here, so I need to add another piece somewhere around here, you know, just so I can say, all right, okay, so I just need to work on this a bit more. But basically what I would do, say this one's on, okay, so we want to cover her up. And so what I would do is I'd come to a tool like this, the polygonal lasso tool, and I would take a section that obviously isn't covered up yet. So since she's standing on the stairs, we're going to take a little bit of a staircase. Okay. And once that's selected, I go up to copy, and then I would create a new layer here, and then paste it right onto there and move it wherever I felt like I wanted it. And of course I did this based on the shading in the original. Since these ones are obviously darker than these ones, I'd want to use these steps here to cover these steps and just kind of make it as much as I can. Obviously it's very rough. You can see where I kind of, you know, mess with the lines, and it's obviously not perfect, but this is just kind of a way to fix it. And then what I do is once I move it, I would use things like scale or rotate, skew, distort, perspective, warp, you know, whatever I felt like I needed to do in order to cover up this spot. And I would just spam them like crazy. Like obviously you can see how many layers it takes just to do something like this. So this is definitely one of those cases where it's very complicated and it's obviously not perfect, but the results are great. And especially since we're going to have Cindy covering it up here, it doesn't have to be, you know, that ultimate state of perfection. So if we drag it, we save it as a PNG file, we drag it onto here, suddenly she's gone and it's just Dimitri running away. Okay, and so then we just take our leading lady that we actually want, so in this case it would be Cindy. And you would try and make it as much as you possibly can, the same general size that you would want it to be. She looks a little bit big now that I look at her compared to Dimitri's size. We would just try and make it look as, you know, as realistic as you possibly can. And then, you know, there you go. And you have Cinderella there and you have Dimitri there, all in the same scene with no Anastasia in the background. Alright, and then as for this one, this is one of those cases where I actually did not render. This is not a rendered manip. I actually just stuck this one straight into the project. And this is for a specific reason. So with this scene, I wanted Dimitri to kind of be looking at Anya, who is going to be his current girlfriend, the one that he got after he ditched Cindy. Who's kind of just watching her dance, and then all of a sudden he pictures Cindy in the place of Anya at this dance. Alright, so this one is a few steps. So basically, I have the original footage down here. And what I did was, in order to get rid of Anya, I would take another screenshot, which is this tool right here that we would use. And I kind of took it later on back here, so she's as small as possible. In fact, I think it was farther along in the movie. But I would take a screenshot, so this is the actual image file. And this is actually what it looks like, and I kind of move it to the position that I wanted, so I can try and get rid of Anya as much as possible. And of course, you know, you would use things like cookie cutter. This is what I use to try and get that area. Give it a nice soft edge, and then I would put Cinderella's masking on top. And this is also one of those cases where color corrector, cookie cutter, brightness, and contrast, all of that is going to be your best friend, and here is why. Alright, so originally this is what the mask would look like on top of what we already done here. So obviously she's a lot darker. Her dress is kind of coming out down here where we obviously see the glass is a little bit more opaque on the bottom. So the image behind it's kind of disappearing, and we're not getting that here with Cindy. She's also kind of the wrong color. She's more blue than what we want. We want her to be more of this pinkish magenta kind of color red. So what I did was I got some brightness and contrast, so she's not as dark. Now she's a little bit, a little bit more in line as far as the brightness and the contrast of the image behind her. Then you would go to color corrector, and I moved it so it's a little bit more pink. A little bit more pink and purple, so it matches more of what's surrounding her, making it look like she's more in the scene. This is also a great way you can mess with saturation, gamma. Doesn't look like I really did anything much on that particular scene. And then to make this part blurry so that she's matching the image around her, I basically just took this general section of the image of the mask, and I just feathered it a lot. So you have her, her dress slowly kind of disappearing into nothing here. And then of course, because I wanted her to suddenly appear and disappear, I left the fades so that suddenly Anya reappears. And that's basically just kind of how I did those little tricks and effects for masking. Some of it's a lot more general than some of you would probably like, but hopefully that helps. And then as far as actual effect editing, mainly what I do with most of my videos is I use this particular blur. I'm not even going to bother saying the name, but it's the G1. And this is what I use for a lot of my flow. This is the effect where you're going from crisp, clean footage. Obviously it's not blurry, to suddenly, as you kind of move on in the clip, suddenly it starts to blur as it fades away. And this is kind of just a cooperation between using fades and using the blur effect. So it's a little bit easier to kind of show you it here. So what I would do is I would start out with a keyframe that's set to 0, so we don't have any blur. It's just, nice and clear. And then I'd stop it just either at the very end, depending on exactly when the clip is kind of disappearing, because obviously by here you don't really see the clip at all. So I can usually just end it here, and I'll usually set it to about 0 to 0, 0 for both the horizontal and vertical range. And that's just a kind of a nice setting, just to kind of show you how much blur is going on with that setting. Right there. So you still basically see shapes. They're just very fuzzy. I guess you could call it like a drunken kind of effect, where you still see basic kind of things, just not sharp, crisp, clean detail. So it's not like extremely blurred. It's just a kind of nice medium. And then you just slowly just kind of fade it. In this case, I actually went for this particular clip. I started with the blur effect and then slowly went to the point where there was no blur, then added another keyframe where it was also 0 because I wanted this space for her to be nice, crisp, and clean, and then faded back out to a blur. And I'll just kind of do this in all my videos. I'll kind of just go in and out, just all over the place, but most of the time I'll use it on just about every clip, just to keep a nice consistency. You can also see with this one that I also added a little bit of a black and white to color effect, where you have color here, so it's a 0% of the black and white effect. And then slightly before it ends, I'll have it be at 100% black. And then one of the things that I do with my videos is track settings. So this is your compositing mode. And it tells you what you want Sony Vegas to do with all of the stuff that's going to be on this track. So one of the things I like to do is, instead of it being source alpha, which is normally what it is that I have it set to lighten. And what lighten does is it makes all these dark areas that are in the clip, which would be Dimitri's clip, are going to show whatever's light behind it. So because Cindy is wearing this white handkerchief around her face, a little bit of that and her face and her eyes are going to still show through, even though we're fading it. And if we didn't have that fade, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so you see that with these dark areas, and even in some of the light areas, you're going to see this clip behind it. And that's partially because of the fade here. So if I get rid of that. Okay, so this is a lot more better of an example, but basically it's going to show the clip underneath in the darker areas. And one of the fun things that I like doing using this with my transitions, it's kind of fun just to see a little bit of the bright stuff coming through. Sometimes it adds coloring effects, like in this one, this particular one, it's starting to make right here, these areas are suddenly kind of getting this like yellowish color to them that almost makes them look a little green. And all of that is due to the lightness in this clip starting to come through those dark areas. So it kind of just makes this, fun little thing. Sometimes I have them just as the regular source alpha. A lot of times I'll have them at lighten. It kind of just depends on how you want your scenes to go, but that's just one of the fun things that I like to work with. Also, another thing that kind of happens with this MEP part in general, this is a transition that I really love using. These are NewBlue transitions, so they're not something that actually originally comes with Sony Vegas. It's one of those that you have to download separately. But if you ever download them, I highly recommend doing the motion blur transitions. Just motion blur in general has a lot of really nice ones. This one in particular, the NB Zoom, is my favorite. And it's kind of funny because I don't use any of these presets that are on here. I only use this one. And this is the effect where you have, this particular clip of Cindy, just kind of fading away, and then all of a sudden, as that's getting darker, this clip of Dimitri and Cinderella suddenly appears like it's just kind of moving out like really fast. And this is a way that you could do it without having to use pan and crop and blur tools. It's just kind of like this really fast way that I do it. And it's a lot of fun just to use. Normally I like the zoom to end right on the beat, so it's like it's coming right in, just this fast, abrupt kind of a transition. Another one that I like to use is also NewBlue is the AB Glow. This is a way, in case you didn't want to use brightness and contrast as a flash, or maybe you did use them, but you want to just differentiate because this is the starting of a new phase, or maybe it's a case where you have a hi-hat in the song being used, so it's different than just like, say, a bass drum being hit, and you want to differentiate between the glows. You would use this one. It's just a nice little preset glow. It's kind of like a flash, but it has this glowy effect, because obviously Dimitri's not going to be glowing like that normally, even though we may wish he was. But it's just this nice way, it kind of ups the brightness and contrast a little bit while it adds this nice little glow effect to it. So then you have this nice differentiating between that and what I would use here this is where I would use brightness and contrast. Now, normally when you take a class or something, at least my experiences, basically in my photography class, they would tell me never to use brightness and contrast because it's terrible. But I'm telling you that brightness and contrast is actually my best friend as far as video editing. And this is because you can make some really amazing flashes and bead effects that you wouldn't normally get to use if you use, say, color curves. Because I can't really imagine doing beats with color curves. The way I do this is that right here where this anchor point is, this is the beat. So what I'll do is I'll start my first anchor point, and then everything's going to be set to 0, but really you're only going to be wanting to animate the brightness. You can mess with contrast center, mess around with it, find different effects that are kind of cool for you, but what I like to use just for beats in general is I just like to use brightness. And then right when you get to the beat, you would add just another keyframe, which is this little button right here. And you would just set it up, just move it up however you want it. Depending on the beat, it kind of just, depends on how much you want it emphasized. So say that this is just going to be a regular downbeat. That's kind of, just the bass drum. So it's not like it's loud and, and kind of in your face. It's just like one of those subtle beats. Then you wouldn't want to like make it, really, really high. You would just want it just a little tiny bit brighter. So in this case, I usually use about 75, 80, 88. That's usually a pretty good area to stop at. If it's more of a hi-hat or a big crash, kind of a beat, then I would definitely increase it to maybe around like 200 or so. And then, of course, you would add another keyframe. And usually I like my flashes to be very gradual in how they disappear, go back to their regular brightness and contrast. So as you can see, like, this is where the beat kind of starts. It's this, I could have it a lot shorter, make it more abrupt, but generally I like to go a little bit longer, usually about at least twice the length that this was. Just because it's a little bit smoother, kind of adds this just nice effect where it just gradually gets darker and kind of matches the fade. But it's all up to preference, and of course this one is just going to be set to its regular 0. Alright, so that pretty much covers most of the effects. I know a specific one that Aariel&Amber was talking about was just how do you get it to be very contrasty before you get to the next clip. Now most of it just happens to me because I use these fades. So the fades, as they're happening, your clip is slowly getting darker. And when you add a coloring on top of it, you're going to just kind of emphasize the fact that it's getting darker, and just gradually, just kind of automatically just makes it contrasted. And so with this particular one, what I usually tend to do, this is a good spot to show it to you. Okay, so we have two different fades, and I kind of showed this with you on my last tutorial. So as this one, you got it nice and just kind of normal. Of course, there's a beat there that I'm using, but it's slowly and gradually getting darker. The blur just kind of adds to the contrasted effect a little bit. But because this one is also having a fade, both of the clips are kind of doing this triangle kind of effect, where you're going from bright to dark to bright again. And it just automatically just kind of adds the contrast to both clips. And so that's basically all it really is. I don't know exactly how to do, like, to push an effect to make it do that. It just kind of does it on its own. But you're welcome to play around with it. Find any cool effects that you think work as far as your style and the things you want to do with it. Just have fun with it. And if you have any questions, just ask me. If you want me to do a tutorial on a specific video or maybe an effect, ask me. Now is a really great time since I'm trying to get through all my 2,500 sub dedication celebration tutorials. And that'll hopefully be happening soon. I'll start getting some MEPs, links to actual colorings. So if you have colorings that you really want, you can leave me a comment with, say, the video that features the coloring, and I'll just see what I can do. So thanks, guys.